Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a topic that's, well, absolutely fundamental to how we see ourselves and the world: gender. We're going to build a solid guide from the ground up. And what's really interesting is that our blueprint for this comes from a place you might not expect: an engineering ethics course. So let's get into it.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll tackle the big three: sex, gender, and sexuality, and get clear on what makes them different. Then, we'll zoom in on identity and expression, the personal side of things. From there, we'll see how this all plays out in the real world with stereotypes. And finally, we'll talk about what it means to move towards gender justice. First things first, let's get those fundamentals down.
All right, Section 1. Getting these three concepts straight is probably the most important first step we can take. They get mixed up and used interchangeably all the time, but they actually point to totally different parts of who we are.
Okay, first up, sex. This is the biological piece of the puzzle. We're talking about physical characteristics, things like chromosomes, hormones, and anatomy. It's the classification, like male, female, or intersex, that's usually assigned when a baby is born. You can kind of think of it as the biological hardware you're born with.
Next, we have gender. And this is where things get really interesting. If sex is the hardware, you could say gender is more like the social software. It's not about your biology. It's about what a society or a culture says it means to be a man, a woman, or a non-binary person. And because it's a social idea, what's considered masculine or feminine can look totally different depending on where you are in the world, and it can change over time.
And the third piece here is sexuality, which is completely separate from the other two. This is all about attraction. Who are you drawn to emotionally, romantically, or sexually? So quick recap: sex is biological, gender is social, and sexuality is about attraction. Three distinct concepts, each on its own track.
Okay, now that we've got those basic definitions sorted, let's go a level deeper. This next part is all about how gender is felt on the inside and how it's shown on the outside. We're shifting from the big social categories to the personal, individual experience.
So what do we mean by gender identity? Well, this is your deep, internal, personal feeling of your own gender. It's that core sense of who you are, whether that's a man, a woman, a bit of both, or neither. For a lot of folks, this internal feeling matches the sex they were assigned at birth. That's called being cisgender. For others, it doesn't align, and that's known as being transgender.
And if identity is that internal feeling, then gender expression is how you show it to the world. It's the external presentation. We're talking about things like your haircut, the clothes you wear, your mannerisms, your voice, all the signals you send out that communicate your gender to other people.
So, to put it really simply, gender identity is what's inside. It's that personal sense of self. Gender expression is what's on the outside. It's how you present that self to everyone else. And the really important thing to remember is that for any given person, these two don't always line up in the way you might expect.
This all leads to a really crucial point. Our modern understanding is moving away from a simple two-box system of just male or female. It just doesn't capture the full, rich reality of human experience. Instead, it's more helpful to think of a gender spectrum. This includes identities like non-binary, gender fluid, and agender, all perfectly valid ways of being that exist outside that old binary model.
Okay, so we've got the concepts, we've got the definitions, but so what? Why does any of this really matter? Well, this next section is all about connecting the dots to the real world and seeing how assumptions about gender can have a huge, tangible impact.
We've all heard stereotypes like these, right? These oversimplified and frankly often wrong ideas, like men are better at math or women are more emotional. And in a professional setting, like engineering, this might show up as the belief that it's a job for men or that women are just naturally better suited for the admin roles. The problem is, these aren't just words. They can actually box people in and limit their potential.
And these stereotypes have very real consequences. They can create gaps in education, discouraging girls and trans students from even considering fields like science and tech. And for those who push through, these biases can follow them into the workplace, leading to things like the gender pay gap, that infamous glass ceiling that stops them from getting promotions, and even creating hostile work environments. It's like a chain reaction that all starts with a flawed idea.
So, given all these challenges, where do we go from here? That brings us to our final section. We're going to pivot from looking at the problems to exploring the solutions.
let's look at the ethical values and practical steps we can take to build a fairer world. This is the big question, isn't it? What's the right way, the ethical way, to tackle these gaps in inequalities? The good news is, our source material doesn't just leave us hanging with the problem. It actually lays out a path forward.
And that path is guided by 4 key values. First, there's equity, which is about fairness and recognizing that to be fair, we might have to treat people differently based on their unique challenges. Then diversity, which isn't just about tolerating difference, but truly valuing it. Third is inclusion, which is the active work of making sure everyone feels like they truly belong. And finally, justice, which means we have to actively fix the damage from past discrimination and stop it from happening again.
So what does that look like in practice? Well, here are some concrete steps. It can start with things like policies that ensure representation in schools and jobs. You follow that up with targeted skill building, like boot camps to get more people into tech. All of this needs to be backed up by strong legal protections. And finally, you foster economic empowerment through things like funding and training for entrepreneurs. You see how each step builds on the last?
And this brings us to one last really powerful thought, especially since our source is an engineering ethics course. The tech we design and build every day isn't neutral. It can either end up reflecting and reinforcing our existing biases, or we can consciously and deliberately design it for equity. That choice is a massive ethical responsibility.
And that's a wrap. Kind of wild to think this whole framework came out of a course on engineering ethics. It's just a powerful reminder that understanding these very human concepts is critical in literally every field. I'm your host, and this has been The Explainer. Thanks for joining us, and we hope we've left you with some things to chew on.